your questions on whatever topics come to mind. Yes, in the white shirt.
Yeah, I got a question. Do you think that Paulson and Greenspan and all those people, are they incompetent, or are they lying about all this? Like,
well, first of all, I mean, look at their motivation. I mean, all these guys that are advising the president, who advised President Bush, they're all from Wall Street, and so they see stuff. They see everything from their perspective, and their perspective is what's good for Wall Street is good for the country, and that's often not the case. I mean, their goal is, how do we get more money to my friends that still work at Goldman Sachs, or and Wall Street is certainly benefiting dramatically. Look at all the money that has been made by investment bankers and hedge funds because of this monetary policy. Because remember, the way that new money is introduced into the economy is through the banking system, right? These banks get access to the money first, and they take it and they speculate with it. And of course, when the government is debasing money, asset prices go up because you're diminishing the value of money. In many cases, it's not that the assets are more valuable, it's just the money that we're pricing it in is less valuable. But they take that cheap money and they lever it up, and they can make an extraordinary amount of money. But they're not helping the economy, they're hurting the economy. They're just delivering inflation to the economy, and they're producing nothing. Wall Street's they're not making anything over there. They're just, and a lot of the money that Wall Street is making is basically the purchasing power that the rest of the country is losing. The reason so many people, are working so hard for less, the reason, it takes two wage earners to support a family, whereas, not too long ago it only took one. The reason that people can't retire, the reason that people are loaded up with debt, is because all the money is going to Wall Street. And so a lot of it is just their own self-interest, their own perspective. And of course, I think they've convinced the politicians, because all the politicians, they watch the polls and then they watch the stock market. And they think that it's their job to keep the stock market going up, so they have to keep Wall Street happy. Because a lot of times, the success or failure of the economy is measured by the level of the stock market. But that's wrong. I mean, the reality is the stock market is too high. Asset prices are too high. Home prices are too high. If home prices and stock prices come down, that's not failure, that's success. We're helping to get an equilibrium. The problem is when assets are mispriced, it distorts the economy. And we need to remove the distortion. We're never going to solve these problems until we have efficient pricing in markets. But the politicians are looking at a different objective. How do we keep the stock market going up? Because unfortunately, if we did the right thing, if the government pursued my policies, stock prices would fall and real estate prices would fall. Nobody sees that as a solution. But unfortunately, it is. Yeah.
Do you anticipate that the government might try to enact dramatic wage and price controls? And
I don't think they'll actually have to enact wage controls, because I don't think wages are going anywhere, but I think prices are. And wages are prices, they're the price of labor. But with so many people unemployed, it's going to be hard for workers to get much higher wages. But it's not going to be hard for prices to go up. And a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that, well, if wages can't go up, then prices can't go up. They're wrong. They're totally wrong. They're different prices. But remember, a lot of the stuff that we make, that we consume, is imported. And so if our wages aren't going up, but the dollar's going down, that means everybody else's wages are going up in dollar terms, and they can now afford all the things, even though we can't. And of course, there are a lot of things that we produce that we can export. And so if the dollar is losing value as a result of inflation, there are a lot of products that American manufacturers or American farmers or whoever are selling in America that they're going to try to export. And as exports go up, that diminishes the supply of goods for Americans. So even though demand is falling, supply is falling. And so prices can still rise. People who think you can't have inflation with high unemployment don't know anything about inflation or employment. Because in general, what keeps prices down and what makes them fall is productive people. Lots of people employed. Lots of people making things. Because under a market economy, the more productive you are, You know, and you can, you see these things. Look at, cell phones and laptop computers and plasma TVs. All these things get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper because of productivity. Because, we're making more stuff. So it has nothing to do with the number of people who have jobs. And if the government is going to print money, if we're all unemployed, they can't print that limitless amount of money just because we're not working. In fact, if we were working and producing things, they could print a little bit more. So actually, the more unemployment there is, the easier it is to create inflation, or at least the easier it is for prices to rise when the government creates inflation. Yeah.
My question is this. Whereas the Federal Reserve of the United States, they have a dual mandate to combat inflation and to promote growth, correct? Whereas other economies such as Europe, the European Central Bank is strictly price stability. They have no fiscal.
Yeah, I mean the whole concept of the dual mandate is wrong, because the way the Federal Reserve tries to promote growth is by creating inflation, because that's the only thing it can do. Right? The Federal Reserve, all they can do is print money, or they can add money to circulation or take it out. So that's the only tool they have, right? They manipulate it through interest rates or open market operations, but the Fed just decides how much inflation it creates. And so when they're trying to fight unemployment, they're doing it by creating inflation. But you don't do that. I mean, the Fed simply does not have the tools. Now, in the long run, the only way the Fed can help lay the foundation for long-term growth is to provide a sound currency and to let the markets set interest rates in an efficient manner. I mean, the reason that we have no savings in America is because interest rates have been too low. Right? Under a normal situation like the United States, where nobody is saving and everybody is borrowing, interest rates would have to rise. That would discourage borrowing and encouraging savings. And then we would have an equilibrium. We would bring up our savings, and the market would clear. But the Federal Reserve intervenes and artificially creates money to keep interest rates lower than they should be. And that creates problems, because we don't have the savings to finance all this borrowing.
But to get to my question, whereas the European Central Bank, their mandate is to ensure price stability for everybody in all the 27 countries that are going to be under the European Union. But what I'm trying to get at, what power do you have to change the mandate? As a senator, what power would you have in order to change the mandate of the Federal Reserve?
Well, we would have to have another act of Congress. It was Congress that amended the original Federal Reserve Act to give it the current mandate. When the Federal Reserve was first established in 1913, it had a very different mandate. In fact, when the Federal Reserve was first established, Federal Reserve notes were backed 40% by gold. They were backed 100% by commercial paper, which was the paper that they rediscounted, which were short-term loans by other banks that they exchanged for Federal Reserve notes. What would happen is, if you were a bank, if I was a small banker and I made a loan, right? I would have a loan document. I would have a piece of commercial paper that reflected somebody's promise to pay me money. I could take that piece of paper to the Federal Reserve in exchange for a Federal Reserve note. And the Federal Reserve, in order to give you that note, would have to have that paper plus gold behind it. And the Federal Reserve, they were not even allowed, part of the charter, the Federal Reserve was not allowed to buy Treasury debt. They weren't even allowed to do it originally. They changed it in World War I because the government wanted to sell bonds to the Federal Reserve to fight the First World War. So they amended the Federal Reserve Act to allow the Federal Reserve to buy these bonds. They never should have done that. But I'd like to, move backwards to, take away some of these powers. Unfortunately, right now, the Federal Reserve was the single biggest contributor to these problems, to the financial bust. I've said if there was a deck of cards, for all the people who created the problem, Alan Greenspan would have been the ace of spades. But instead of punishing the Fed for their role in creating this crisis, we're rewarding them by giving them enhanced power. And so it's all, Washington's the only place where you reward failure. And unfortunately, now that they're getting even more power, they're going to do even more damage. Right? I mean, yeah.
At the Campaign for Liberty conference, I remember we met briefly, and you mentioned that you weren't necessarily in favor of abolishing the Federal Reserve. how would the Federal Reserve be right in your eyes? And would such a solution be exclusive of competing currencies?
Who's competing currencies?
Private currencies being able to compete with a Federal Reserve issued currency.
Well, I mean, the way to do that, I mean, you obviously there are other currencies out there. Anybody, you can take euros, and you can go to a bank, and you can go to a store and convince somebody to take euros.
Not necessarily government currencies. I'm talking about Walmart money or local bank issued currency, like we used to have competing currencies. Really.
Well, I mean, I don't know that. I mean, it wouldn't be currency. It wouldn't be legal tender. But I mean, Walmart can issue a coupon, and there's nobody that stops you from taking a 50-cent off coupon on something and trying to use it. I mean, if someone will take it, there's no law against it. The problem is that if you want to use a competing currency, let's say you want to use something like gold, right? The problem is the tax consequences. So yeah, what I would be in favor of is abolishing the capital gains on precious metals so that gold could in effect circulate as money. Because right now, if we try to use gold as money, every time there's a trade, the government is going to say there's a tax consequence. So if I took gold, let's say you gave me an ounce of gold, and you bought, let's say you gave me an ounce of silver to buy one of my books. And then I turned around, 3 months later and took that ounce of silver and bought something else, right? The government's going to say, well, what was that silver worth when you first earned it? And what was it worth when you traded it for something else? And if there was an appreciation, we want you to pay tax on it. Well, how can I do that? How can I keep, that's not fair. I mean, and so until they abolish that tax, which shouldn't be there, it's very difficult for that type of system to evolve in competition with, it can happen in the underground economy, but of course you're breaking the law. You're not paying income taxes on these transactions. But the reason that I'm not in favor of necessarily abolishing the Federal Reserve is because right now I'm sure that if we abolish the Federal Reserve, we would simply transfer their functions directly to the Congress. And I think they would do an even worse job. So, you got to be careful what you do to say, well, it's always, the devil you know. So it might be easier to just try to put more handcuffs on this Federal Reserve than trying to, get rid of it and just, let Congress do what they want. But ideally, we would be on a gold standard because money has to have intrinsic value. I mean, it doesn't work. Now, the theory has always been that, but it's inefficient, right? In order to get money, gold, we have to mine it. We have to dig it out of the ground. We have to waste all these resources finding the gold. Why can't we just use paper? Because then we could, all that time that we spend just digging gold out of the ground and putting it in a vault, we wouldn't have to do that anymore. We could just print money and then we could do something else. And in theory, it works great. But in practice, it doesn't work. Because the politicians don't have any discipline. The minute you let them print money, they do it. They never can resist that temptation. And it's because people are humans, right? People are that we need gold. We need discipline. It's like saying, wouldn't it be great if, we didn't need to leave babysitters with our, 5 and 6 year olds, or, but they don't have any of their kids. Somebody's got to look out for them. You can't just say, well, in an ideal world, they would just, police themselves. So the politicians are not going to behave if you take away gold, if you take away the discipline, the central, and you can have all kinds of ways to try to say it's an independent system and this, but it never works. So I don't think it's a waste of money to have to go and dig the gold out of the ground and put it in a vault. I think what we get for that, in terms of stability in our monetary system, is worth its weight in gold. And you have to remember where money comes from. Money replaced barter. And in barter, if I made chairs and somebody else made tables, right? If I wanted a table, I had to find a table maker who wanted chairs, and then we could trade. And the whole idea behind money is let's find one good, one commodity that we can all accept for everything. So if I want to buy a table, I don't need to find a guy who wants chairs. I'll just give him a guy that I'll just pay in gold. because everyone will accept gold. But what we're exchanging also has real intrinsic value. So when you take the intrinsic value away from money, you lose that key concept, that the money itself has to have some real value. Because paper has no real value. That's a problem. Yeah.
It's frequently pointed to that one of the causes of the financial crisis is the complexity of the financial instruments used by Wall Street. What is your opinion on that, and do you see a role for government simplifying those financial instruments?
Now, I don't think it was the complexity. I think it was, the cheap credit from the Fed that financed it all. And, a lot of the instruments that blew up, a lot of the, derivative type instruments like credit default swap, the problem was the underlying assets that everybody was loading up on were inherently stable. And the insurance that they were buying was underpriced because it was based on a computer model that assumed asset prices would always go up. Why did the model assume that? Because that's what they put in. Because that's what the programmers told it, right? And, the expression is garbage in, garbage out. And so, but all of these mistakes were being made by people who were under the influence of government alcohol. Right? Only in that kind of world, how can anybody think who isn't drunk that real estate prices can only go up? I mean, everybody knows that prices go up and down. And I used to argue, I'd show people a chart. I'd say, here, this is real estate. Right? How can this chart go like this? Why can't it go back like that? But they didn't program that into their models. It was just always like this. So, but in a real world where they didn't have this cheap money, it wouldn't have happened. And of course, if we didn't have, one of the reasons that there was so much demand for higher yielding assets, regardless of risk, is because government took the risk-free rate down so low that everybody was searching for yield. And people, they didn't care about the risk because they knew that they couldn't live on the puny yields that were available. So the government pushed everybody out onto the risk curve. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't realize that they were taking as much risk as they were. Yeah.
I'm curious, what is your outlook on Japan? They seem to have a much bigger problem than we have. They have a much bigger national debt, and they are also keeping their interest rate low forever. So what lessons can we learn from Japan? What do you think is going to happen?
I don't think they have a bigger problem than we do. And I think that the main reason that Japan is keeping their rates so low is to keep the dollar propped up. I think the Japanese realize that if they were to raise rates significantly, the dollar would crash. And that's what they should do. I mean, part of Japan's problem is the rates are too low. They need rates to go up. But the reason that big debts are not a problem, as big a problem for Japan, is because while the Japanese government has big debts, Japanese citizens have a lot of savings. And so Japan is not borrowing from other countries. The Japanese government is borrowing from the Japanese people. Now, I think the Japanese people would be better off if that wasn't happening, but it's not unsustainable, at least not yet. Meanwhile, the Japanese are still a leading manufacturer and exporter. They have a trade surplus and a current account surplus. So I think their problems are much smaller than ours, but they still exist. But America is kind of unique in the fact that our economy is totally dependent on global charity. And our economy evolved in this way because the dollar was the reserve currency. The Japanese yen was not. So, we were given a blank checkbook. We were able to, print money and exchange it for real stuff. And so we were given all this rope, and we promptly hung ourselves with it. But no other nation in the world had all that rope. And so we were able to do a lot more damage to our economy. Any other country would have been, if you're looking at somebody drinking alcohol, any other country would have been cut off long ago. But because the dollar was the reserve currency, nobody cut us off yet. Yeah.
And what's your view on the future of trade policy? Are they concerned about new protectionist trade measures?
Well, I don't think so because I mean, how are we going to fight a trade war? I mean, we would lose. We're unarmed. If we put imports on duties, it's just going to hurt us. We're going to tell people, if you want to sell products here, we're going to make Americans pay more for them. And it's not. I don't think that our politicians are going to do that because you would immediately just increase prices for Americans. What trade policy should be, of course, is free. We should have free trade. I would just unilaterally drop all of our trade barriers. I wouldn't even care about negotiating. I know that the best thing for Americans is no trade, no tariffs. Anybody, but the problem with international trade right now is we're not trading. We're just getting stuff. The world is sending us stuff and we're not trading anything. We're just giving them IOUs. So that has to change. The world is going to ultimately demand something for their stuff. They're not going to just take our paper. And that is when, again, our standard of living is going to have to decline dramatically because it's a lot easier to print money than make stuff.
Could you explain why the free market is the best option with regards to ecological and environmental sustainability?
Well, for environmental policy? Well, I think in general, you're going to have certain externalities associated with, if I create pollution, theoretically, I can dump my waste in a river and it's going to be a problem for somebody down the river and it's not necessarily a problem for me. The question is, how best should society regulate those types of externalities? Should it be done, beforehand through the government, or should it be done, or even after the fact, through the court system, where the person who is now having to suffer for the pollution, individually filing a lawsuit against the polluter? Personally, when it comes to certain externalities, I think it makes sense to have regulations rather than trying to settle everything through damages through a court system. But I don't think, in general, it should be on a national level unless, the states are not able to do it. If you have pollution moving across state lines or some reason. But I do believe that in certain circumstances, in those cases, that there are ways in which government can become involved to have a more efficient, way to rein those externalities in than simply waiting for somebody to be damaged and then sue, and having simply the threat of a lawsuit. I can simply fear a lawsuit. I cannot pollute knowing that you're going to sue me. Or there could be some regulations put in advance to say, look, you can't do this, and then of course, if you do pollute, then the government comes in. But I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I'm not really sure what's the most efficient way to do it. But in most cases, for most things, if you want to get low prices and high quality, that comes from the market. It never comes from the government. Since one of the things that's been coming up recently quite a bit, maybe it's good to talk about it since you guys are all students, is education. Education is a perfect example of where the government gets involved and drives the prices through the roof. The government gets involved in the education process because college tuition is so expensive. And so politicians get elected by promising more aid for education. And then the students and the students' parents will vote for those politicians because they say, well, college is so expensive, I need that aid. And so I'm going to vote for whatever politician is going to help more student loans and more programs. But no one stops to realize that the only reason college is so expensive in the first place is because of all those government programs. That without the programs, people wouldn't need the loans. People wouldn't need the scholarships or because they could afford to go. But the government comes in. Normally markets drive prices down. You think, why is tuition at universities higher today? I just recently I did record a video blog, and I looked at the tuitions at Yale in the past, and I noticed that for the first 45 years that Yale charged tuition, it was the exact same price. It was $33 a year, and it never went up for 40. And then it went up a little bit, but by 1870 or something, it had gone up to about $140 a year, and then 45 years later, it got to $160. So it took like 45 more years to go up 15%. Right? Now, of course, the tuition was like $35,000. It's gone up, 100 times. It only tripled in the 19th century, and it's gone up 100 times in the 20th century. So what happened? What changed? Right? Why were tuitions so stable and now they're going through the roof? The only thing that changed is the government tried to make them affordable. And it drove it through the roof. Because what does the government do? The government gives kids money to go to school. And so what do? They build up the price. The government makes it so you can go to a bank and borrow as much money as you want to go to school. So you have an unlimited amount of money to bid up prices. So all the students are competing with everybody with government money to see who can pay the most. And the colleges say, this is a great deal for us, so every year they jack tuitions up. And that's why they never, every year we just raise our price. You know, college tuitions are actually up about 7% this year, in the biggest recession since the Great Depression, and they're still rising. How can that be? Government, that's why. The Federal Reserve buying up all those student loans. I mean, I think about it. How many people in this room who are in school, if they couldn't get any money, if they couldn't borrow any money, how many people can actually afford to go to school? If you can afford it, raise your hand without a loan. I said nobody, one guy in the back. So what do you think would happen if all of a sudden, you know, the only reason you can get loans is because the government guarantees them. Otherwise, nobody would be dumb enough to make the loans. And if they did, the rates would be so high you wouldn't want to borrow. So no one in this room would be going to school. So if I stop those government loans tomorrow, right? All of a sudden, the universities, no one's going to apply. Now, so what are they going to do? Are they just going to close down? No, they're going to slash tuitions. I mean, first of all, they have a big fixed cost. They have an empty classroom, right? If they take tuition down from 20,000 to 2,000, 2,000 is better than nothing. It's better than, they're not going to get any tuition from an empty chair. So the first rule of business is get some revenues in. They need revenues. Any revenue is better than no revenue, right? It's because the marginal cost of that extra it's practically nothing. They've already gotten all the costs. Right? So they slash their tuition. So now tuitions collapse. Why aren't they collapsing now? Because they don't have to. Because people will pay the price. Now, the minute that happens, then what are the universities going to do? All right, well, we're not making any money. We're only charging $2,000 a year. What can we do? Now they're going to cut costs. They're going to go through and see, who can we fire? Who don't we need? And they go to these tenured professors and say, you know what? We're not paying you all this money. We can't afford it. Cut your salary. Everybody gets a pay cut. They get efficient. And you know what? The colleges can make money again at a low tuition. I mean, right now, there is no market for low-cost college. Why should there be? The students have all the money. But, you know, and of course, you know, if it becomes an election issue, you know, my opponents say, oh, Peter Schiff is against student loans. He's against students. He's against education. No, I'm not. I'm against the educational establishment ripping off the students. Because student loans don't help the students. They have to pay back the loans. They help the colleges. The colleges get the money. The kids are stuck with the bills. So it's a perfect example of the government coming in and creating a problem where it didn't exist. They did the same thing with healthcare. Why is healthcare so expensive? The same reasons. Healthcare should be getting cheaper, just like college. It should be cheaper today to go to school than it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Why? Well, 30 years ago, they were still using typewriters. They didn't have computers. They were using, carbon copies. They had things on little index cards to keep records. The teachers had to grade the papers by hand. You know, I mean, it was much more complicated. Schools are all about record keeping. And delivering a lecture, I mean, you could, with the internet, and especially when there are so many kids in college today. I mean, when you have more economies of scale, it should be cheaper. It should be cheaper to educate 10,000 kids per kid than 100. To say that, well, the universities are bigger now, that's why it's more. It should be cheaper because it's more. And I tell you, it's funny. Not only has the government driven up the cost of the college degree, but it's driven down the value of the college degree. Because now so many people have them that they mean nothing. You know, in 1940 or 1950, if you had a high school degree, that was pretty good. You could get probably 95% of all jobs with a high school degree. Now a college degree means nothing. You got to get a master's degree. You got to get a doctorate. So you're in school for 8 years, 10 years. How much money do you borrow to get a master's or a doctorate? So you can't even compare a 4-year university tuition today to what it was 40 years ago because they're night and day. They don't. And I would bet, with all the people going to school, that they've dumbed it down anyway. I'd be willing to bet if we just randomly tested high school graduates in 1940, 1950, in math or English or whatever, and compared them to graduates of our universities today, the high school kids back then probably would test higher. They probably knew more. So, you know, all we've done, all of this money for education, all of this has just benefited the educational system, the bureaucracies of our universities and our schools. It hasn't benefited kids who now are forced to stay in college longer, learn less, and get stuck with a horrific bill. You know, my father worked his way through school, and most people, most of our fathers, if your parents didn't have money, you worked your way through school. How did you work your way through school? You had a job. You had a job in the summer. You waited tables, you bussed tables, you delivered pizza, you delivered groceries. You didn't have a fancy job. But you know what? That little bit of money paid for the whole thing. Nobody borrowed money to go to school. It wasn't until the government got involved and everybody borrowed money. Now it costs a fortune. Anyway, any other questions? Yeah.
I have a political question. Your message is really honest and it's really realistic, but it may not come off as that hopeful to people. And we saw in the last election that they basically sold this hope but with little substance. You've got all the substance. So how are you going to translate this to the average voter in the Republican primary? Is there an issue that you're sort of going to focus in, like when Ned Lamont ran against the war and Rand Paul is he's basically running against the debt? Like, how are you going to just...
Well, I'm going to try, obviously, my argument is a little bit more intellectual, so people are going to have to get beyond the immediate. Now, a lot of people understand that in normal things. If they understand the concept of no pain, no gain. If you're overweight, you're going to go on a diet. You're going to exercise, you're going to cut out the junk food, and that might not be, as fun as the activities that led to your obesity. Right? So people understand that, or they understand the concept of, a drug addict wanting to get, straight and the problems with withdrawal. So hopefully people understand my message is, look, it's going to have to get worse before it gets better.
That's like tough love.
Yeah, because of the mistakes we've made. But the solution isn't to keep making mistakes, because then we guarantee it will never get better and it will only get worse. But what I'm hoping to accomplish, I say, look, there is light at the end of this tunnel. Because if we can do the right thing, then we can rebuild the economy. And I'm hoping that one part of the right thing is to shrink government and to say to somebody, look, things are going to get difficult, but if I can at least lower your taxes, if I can reduce the regulation that you have to live with, but in order to do that, of course, I have to be able to sell the concept of spending cuts. So I have to be able to, let people know that government checks have got to get smaller. And I'm also not afraid to tackle, the real issues like Social Security. I mean, I was on this show, Face the State, and someone asked me about Social Security, and I said, well, look, they said, what if he monkeys with Social Security? People said, monkey? I don't have to monkey with it, it's already broke. I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme. What's to monkey with? It's a disaster. And I need to tell people the truth about Social Security, right? That every politician wants to pretend it's the greatest thing. It's a terrible thing. We never should have started it. But we did, and now we're in serious trouble. Sure, there are some people that like Social Security because they got in early. There were some Bernie Madoff clients that made money. They got in early and they got out. But, most people are going to hate Social Security. Most young people, the people in this room, you're not going to get jack out of Social Security. But what you're going to get is stuff, you're going to get a big bill while you're working. The way Ponzi schemes work is the people that get in early make money. But the money they make is equal to the losses of everybody that comes later. And it's actually not even a zero-sum game, because a lot of the money is siphoned off the top by the promoters of the scheme, in this case, the government. So yeah, Ima Friedman was the first person to ever get a Social Security check. She paid something like $22 in taxes. And then she lived to 100. And she collected maybe $20,000 in benefits. It was a great deal for her. It's a lousy deal for her granddaughter. And it's a lousy deal for the country. So we've got to find a way to get rid of it. Yeah, now, before it destroys us, right? So I've got to, face these tough issues, and we'll see if the public is willing to elect somebody who's going to talk about it. If they're not, if they just want another politician telling them it's going to get better if we just spend more money and print more money. But hopefully, things are going to be better. Now, maybe 2010 is too early for me. Maybe it won't be bad enough, right? It's going to be worse in 2012. It's going to be worse. It's going to keep getting worse. At some point, something's going to have to give. Something's going to snap. People are going to have to realize, it doesn't work. And so maybe if I don't win in 2010, maybe somebody will win in 2012 or something. But at least the message is going to get out there. But yeah, it's going to be difficult winning with the truth, because it's a lot easier to win with a lie.
We've been talking a lot about rights today, but mostly pertaining to individual rights. And I kind of think of the bailouts as a violation of the rights of competing businesses.
Well, obviously, I own a small brokerage firm.
Right. So do you think that there's like a way to modify antitrust laws to protect businesses from government influence?
Well, first of all, I would just assume abolish the antitrust laws. But, we don't need two wrongs to make a right. We just need to the government has no power to bail companies out. What would have happened had the government let all the big banks fail is smaller brokerage firms like mine that didn't do anything wrong, that didn't make these bad decisions. We would have been in a position to expand, to hire some of the people that lost their jobs, and we would clean out, the bad companies, and they would be replaced with better managed companies, and, the market would function. But instead, the incompetent companies are being rewarded. And the money is coming from companies like me, right? We're being taxed to subsidize the mistakes that these larger companies made. And because the larger companies, now have this too big to fail, this is all about mortgage moral hazard. Once the government deems an institution too big to fail, it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. Because now everybody wants to do business with it. They don't loan money to Goldman Sachs. You don't worry, you're going to get your money back because they're too big to fail. It doesn't matter how much risk they're taking. If you loan money to them, you're going to get your money back. If somebody wants to loan money to my company, well, what if Peter doesn't pay me back? I'm not too big to fail. And so the government creates these problems. We need to get the government out of the market completely, but they're not doing it. The politicians refuse to do it. Look, why didn't we let General Motors go bankrupt? Why didn't we let Chrysler go bankrupt? And it's interesting that the government tries to go back to the 1979 bailout of Chrysler as an example of a success. They'll say, look, we bailed Chrysler out in 1979, and we got, I say, exactly. Look at the mess you made. They're bankrupt again. Why didn't you let them go under then? They might have restructured. They wouldn't have been bankrupt again, and maybe General Motors would have restructured. Maybe General Motors' labor union wouldn't have demanded all this, and management wouldn't have caved in if they knew that there was a bankruptcy. In fact, I'm sure that what the government just did with Chrysler and General Motors pretty much assures that Ford is going to go bankrupt. Maybe they wouldn't have, but they will now for sure. Because how are they not? In fact, the Ford unions just turned down all the concessions they were asked to make. And what is Ford going to say? Well, if you don't agree to this, we're going to go bankrupt. Who cares? Because if Ford goes bankrupt, the union members know that their contracts, the government's going to take it over and make sure they all keep getting paid. So, the government needs to get out of this completely. One more question. All right, last question.
So in your campaign materials, you talk a lot about economic issues, particularly sort of macroeconomic issues. But you do talk some about regulation. You don't talk a lot about sort of social issues. So I was wondering whether you consider yourself a libertarian or a conservative or otherwise on those issues.
Yeah, on the social issues, yeah. My outlook is that individuals should be free, and the government should not interfere in the market. The way individuals trade with one another, with employee relationships, with contracts, that these are all private matters that are best left to individuals to negotiate among themselves without the government trying to interfere with that practice, with things, whether it's minimum wage laws or all these different things where the government tries to come in and interfere with our rights to contract, or the way I run my business, where they're regulating, they're requiring I have to do this or I can't do that. So I don't want the government to interfere with commerce and business, only to the extent that my business might impose an externality, whether it's a pollution or something like that. And they should not interfere with individuals in their relationships with one another, in the personal decisions and the choices that they make in their lives, so long as those choices don't negatively impact somebody else. So, if I get some kind of thrill out of, kicking the shit out of people, I just can't go running around doing it. Right? But, if I want to bash myself on the head with, I can do it if I want, if that's what I'm into. So, so on the social issues, I want the government to stay out of things. Whether I'm going to put a seatbelt on, whether I'm going to put a helmet on, whether I'm going to smoke marijuana, whether I'm going to terminate a pregnancy. These are all individual choices that I should be able to make on my own, and the government shouldn't be telling me what I can do and what I can't do. But to the extent if I want to drink alcohol and go to sleep in my bed, that's fine. If I want to drink alcohol and drive a car, that's a problem, because now I'm risking the lives of other people. So you can draw a line between the type of behavior that you can do. You can't say, well, because it's okay for somebody to smoke pot at home. Does that mean that a pilot can smoke pot while he's flying an airplane? Absolutely not, because it's a different situation where he's putting in jeopardy other people's lives. But if I want to put in jeopardy my own life, then that's my own business. And the interesting thing about it is when the government comes in and they try to change this, especially when it comes to something like drugs, and we have the equivalent of modern day prohibition against drugs. What does the government do? The government takes potentially a medical problem. Yeah, I don't think it would be a good thing if everybody was always doing drugs. Look at what it did to Wall Street. It was a good thing. But I don't think that if drugs were legal, we would become a nation of drug addicts, right? I think people have a little bit more, self-restraint with respect to their behavior. But look at the consequences of the war on drugs. Look at the fact that probably 90% of the crime in this country is committed by drug addicts who are stealing because drugs are so expensive that that's the only way they can get the money. Well, if it wasn't for the fact that they were illegal, they would be a lot less expensive. And maybe if drugs were available by prescription through a doctor, as opposed to, from a pusher, if you had to go to a doctor and explain to the doctor, why you wanted to be a heroin addict, maybe the doctor can try to talk you out of it and try to show you, you really want to start doing heroin because you have to come here every week, you have to get a shot, and it's going to screw up your life, That would be better than the pusher telling him how great it is and trying to hook you on it so he can create a customer. So, there's a lot of problems. Look at all the money. Look at how we've corrupted. Look at the problems going on in Latin America because of the drug trade. There's so many problems that we have created. And if you look at does anybody know where drug use is it's most rampant? Anyone know? In prisons, right? The government can't even control drug use in a prison. How are they going to do it, out in the real world where supposedly we have rights? We're free. So we have to keep surrendering all these rights. And, there might be some extra problems if we legalize some of these drugs. Yes, maybe there'd be more addicts. Maybe there wouldn't be. But I know one thing. There'd be a lot less crime. And we wouldn't be spending all this money. We tried it with alcohol. It was the exact same thing. We made alcohol illegal because we thought it was bad. And then at least we're able to see immediately the fact that organized crime was created from prohibition. And, when alcohol ended, the next place they went was narcotics. And then they went to gambling and other things. But we created that. But I'm not going to run on that issue. For one reason, I think I would be very scared to run on that issue. Because if anybody in the drug business actually thought that I could actually get drugs legalized, they'd kill me. Because the people who most want drugs illegal are the drug dealers, because that's where all their profits come from, because they are illegal. Anyway, I guess, was that the end?
Please take your seats for just 1 minute. Going to go over to how things are going to work now.